By the early 1970s, Vauxhall was in genuine trouble. Its Viva HC was cheap and popular, but plagued by rust so aggressive that owners nicknamed it Tin Worm. Its bigger Victor saloon had been aimed squarely at the Ford Cortina and had barely dented its sales. Vauxhall's reputation, once built on solid, well-engineered cars, had curdled into a punchline. So when the Cavalier arrived in showrooms in November 1975, wearing sharp new lines and promising a genuinely modern alternative to Britain's favourite family car, it looked like the underdog fighting back. What most buyers standing in that showroom never realised was just how little of the car in front of them had actually been built in Britain, and how deliberately Vauxhall had chosen exactly that. Here's the first surprise. The Cavalier wasn't really a Vauxhall design at all. It was a rebadged version of the Opel Ascona B, developed in Rüsselsheim, Germany, and it had beaten the Cavalier to market by 3 months. General Motors had decided, at the start of the 1970s, that running separate development programs for Opel and Vauxhall no longer made financial sense. Britain's economy was struggling, West Germany's wasn't, and building 2 different mid-size saloons for 2 overlapping European markets was an expensive redundancy. So the 2 projects were merged. Vauxhall's engineers had originally hoped to give the car its own bespoke bodywork and interior, the way earlier Vauxhalls had always been developed. Cost considerations killed that plan almost immediately. What GM allowed instead was a substantially different front and rear end, styled at Luton, wrapped around an Ascona shell that was otherwise untouched. The car that appeared to launch Vauxhall's comeback was, underneath its new nose and tail, a German product wearing a British badge. That decision only makes sense once you understand the platform underneath it. GM called it the U-car, an internal codename for what was essentially a stretched version of the smaller T-car platform already underpinning the Vauxhall Chevette and Opel Kadett C. It was General Motors' second serious attempt at a world car, one basic engineering package, developed once, then adapted with different badges, trim, and bodywork for markets across Europe and beyond. For a company watching its costs as closely as GM was in the mid-1970s, that shared underpinning meant the Cavalier could exist at all without Vauxhall having to fund an entirely new car from a clean sheet of paper. The badge said Vauxhall. The bill was split with Opel. Even the car's most distinctive styling touch had already been seen elsewhere. The 2-door Cavalier GL Coupe arrived with a dramatic, sloping front end, a genuine head-turner by the standards of a 1970s family car, and one of the Details period reviewers singled out as evidence Vauxhall had finally found some design confidence. What most of them didn't mention was that the shape had debuted first, a few months earlier, on the Opel Manta B, styled at Opel's own studio under Henry Hager. Wayne Cherry, about to become Vauxhall's director of design, simply adopted the same droop-snoot nose for the Cavalier Coupe. It wasn't theft. GM's design studios shared ideas constantly, and Cherry would go on to shape Vauxhall's identity for 2 decades. But the bold new British look that helped sell the Cavalier to British buyers had, in truth, already done its job in Germany first. None of this means the Cavalier was a cynical badge job with nothing to offer. Underneath, Vauxhall's engineers, working from the shared Ascona architecture, gave the car a live rear axle located by a torque tube, trailing arms, and a panhard rod, riding on coil springs, rather than the old-fashioned leaf springs, still doing the job on the Cortina. Up front sat McPherson struts and wishbones. None of it was exotic, but coil springs and a properly located axle control lateral movement, far more precisely than a stack of leaf springs ever can, and it showed the moment either car was pushed into a corner. Contemporary road tests and modern retrospective drives, conducted decades later, described the same thing. The Cavalier's steering felt tighter and more direct. Body roll was noticeably reduced, and the car simply felt more composed being driven hard than the Cortina Mk2 sitting next to it. It wasn't a sports saloon. It was a family car that happened to have been engineered by people who still cared how it handled a roundabout. That mattered more than it might sound, because of where the real battle for Britain's family car market was actually being fought, not in showrooms full of private buyers, but inside company fleet departments. Britain's tax system in the 1970s made company cars an enormous slice of the mid-size saloon market, and fleet managers were a notoriously conservative, detail-obsessed audience. The Cortina Mk2 had dominated that world for years, but by the mid-1970s, it was showing real cracks. Persistent problems with a cable clutch that wore out faster than fleet operators wanted, and camshaft wear on its 1.6 and 2.0-litre overhead cam engines that turned into a recurring maintenance headache. None of that was catastrophic, but fleet managers don't need catastrophe to switch suppliers. They need a reasonable alternative and a good enough reason, and Vauxhall, for the first time in years, was finally offering both. The trouble was, that alternative could barely be built fast enough to matter. For its first 2 years on sale, every single Cavalier sold in Britain was shipped across the North Sea from GM's Antwerp plant in Belgium, running at full capacity and still falling behind demand. It wasn't until 26 August 1977, nearly 2 years after launch, that the first UK-built Cavalier, a 1.3-litre model, driven off the line at Luton by Vauxhall's own manufacturing director, finally rolled into British production. Only then did the 1.6 and 1.9-litre versions follow onto the same line, and only then did supply finally catch up with the orders already stacking up at dealerships. It's a strange story for a car whose entire pitch rested on national pride. For 2 years, Britain's answer to the Cortina wasn't being built in Britain at all. So it's worth being honest about what actually happened once supply caught up, because the tempting version of this story, plucky British underdog dethrones the sales champion, simply isn't true. The Cavalier climbed steadily through the UK sales charts once Luton production ramped up, 13th in 1976, 8th in 1977, a peak of 7th in 1978, with just over 55,000 sold in a single year. That's a genuinely strong run for a company that had been circling the drain a few years earlier. But the Cortina, across its various Mark III and Mark IV guises, kept outselling it every single year, often by a wide margin, and went on to sell close to 2.8 million units across its entire run in Britain. Across the whole 6 years the original Cavalier stayed in production, Vauxhall sold just under 250,000 of them, a number so modest that, for a period, it was reportedly even outsold by the unglamorous, thoroughly conventional Morris Marina, a car nobody remembers fondly for its engineering. In 1978, Vauxhall replaced the original 1.9-litre engine with a 2.0-litre unit, producing around 100 horsepower, enough, in the lighter two-door coupe body, to get from 0 to 60 miles an hour in a genuinely brisk 9.2 seconds, and reach close to 110 miles an hour flat out. Those weren't sports car numbers, but they were competitive with anything Ford offered in an equivalent Cortina, and they arrived in a car that weighed barely a ton, light enough that the extra power actually meant something on the road, rather than simply looking good on a spec sheet. For a company that had spent most of the previous decade being quietly outgunned by Ford in every mechanical department, that was no small thing. The rest of the range stayed deliberately unadventurous, and that restraint was itself part of the strategy. Trim levels ran from a basic L up through GL, with prices at launch stretching from £1,975 for the entry 1600L to £2,707 for the range-topping 1900 GL Coupe, pitched close enough to Cortina money that a fleet manager or private buyer could cross-shop the two without a second thought, while still undercutting most competitors from British Leyland and Chrysler on outright quality. What Car magazine, testing an early Cavalier alongside a Cortina and a Morris Marina, came away in little doubt about which car actually deserved the sale, concluding that Vauxhall's reworked Ascona had put the previously ailing Luton firm firmly back on the road to recovery. The praise was real, it just never fully translated into showroom dominance. Where the Cavalier did occasionally embarrass its rival outright was in a niche the sales charts don't capture well, the enthusiast fringe of the family car market. In 1978, Vauxhall introduced the Sportshatch, a 3-door hatchback variant that, unlike almost everything else about the Mk2 Cavalier, was designed entirely in-house at Luton rather than borrowed from Rüsselsheim. Pitched directly at Ford Capri buyers rather than Cortina drivers, it was tested head-to-head against the Capri 2.0S by Car magazine at the end of 1978 and came away with real credit, despite costing slightly more than the Ford. It was a small, low-volume model, and it never threatened the Capri's sales numbers any more than the standard Cavalier threatened the Cortinas. But it proved something the rest of the Mk2 range couldn't. When Vauxhall's own designers were given a genuinely free hand, they could build something that stood on its own, rather than one borrowed from somewhere else. That's really the honest shape of this story. The 1975 Cavalier didn't outsmart the Cortina, and it certainly didn't outsell it. Ford's sales lead never seriously wavered throughout the Mk2's entire 6-year run. What the Cavalier did was something quieter and, in the end, more consequential. It proved that a struggling, rust-plagued manufacturer could still put a genuinely well-handling, well-built family car on British roads, built largely from borrowed German engineering and assembled, for its first 2 years, in a factory that wasn't even in Britain. It gave Vauxhall's dealer network something to sell, with real conviction for the first time in years, and it gave company car drivers a legitimate reason to cross-shop against the default choice. That foundation mattered more than any single sales chart. When the front-wheel drive Mk2 Cavalier arrived in 1981, built on lessons learned from this car's badge-engineered origins and factory teething problems, it did what the original never managed, selling over 800,000 units and eventually outpacing Ford's Cortina successor outright. The 1975 Cavalier never won its fight. It just made sure Vauxhall was still standing when the rematch came.